So I saw Hellboy and it was pretty goddamn terrible. Originally, I did not even plan on reviewing this movie or even seeing it in the first place. But then I saw everyone was panning it and instantly I just kind of thought, yep, I kind of gotta see this now. Because as you may have learned on this channel, I kind of love tearing train wrecks to pieces. My interest was only heightened more when I found out the director was Neil Marshall. And yes, I somehow only found this out 2 days before the film came out. I plan on talking about him again at some point in the future, but long story short, before I saw this, all I'd seen from him was The Descent, and quite honestly, it's in my top 5 favorite films of all time. Having now seen the rest of them before I saw this film, I can at least say that I think he's a great director. And having done my research, I've seen some interviews, and he seems genuinely gleeful to be working in this industry. And watching his films, even ones I don't quite like, I can always tell that he at least enjoyed making them. Well, apart from this one, kind of, sort of, maybe. There are aspects to this film that do seem like Neil Marshall was really trying, and he did actually seem like he was having fun in this film. The violence that's kind of over the top and all over the place seemed kind of straight out of some of his other films. But the issue is, it's not done as well as it is in any of his other films, and the same goes for everything else about the movie. And even if Neil Marshall was having fun with this film, it kinda doesn't show all the way throughout, maybe because this went through production hell reportedly. Apparently the producers were kinda assholes, and apparently he didn't even stay for all of the production. But none of that really matters, cause nonetheless the film is kind of a train wreck. All of the acting was absolutely abysmal. David Harbour just flat out does not have the charisma to pull off this role, at least based off his performance here. I haven't seen the original Hellboy, so I can't exactly compare him to Ron Perlman, but I have to imagine he was somewhat better. Because I always hear Perlman's Hellboy described as lovable, but in this movie he's just such an unlikable asshole. And Daniel just couldn't sell that enough to make it remotely likable. Aren't you supposed to have a hero you can root for? Mila Jovovich did not sell a villain at all to me. Daniel Day Kim was annoying. I'm not gonna suggest Ed Skrein should have taken his place or anything, not because of race or anything, but just because he's plain bad at acting. But Daniel Day Kim just did not fit his role and was really, really poorly miscast. And he was just not fun to watch, although I think that's also partially to blame on the writing, but we'll get into that in a minute. Ian McShane felt completely out of place. Sophie Okonedo is in this film for like 5 minutes and she really didn't try because she knew she was able to put her talent to much better things. Why would I watch her for less than 10 minutes in this awful movie when I could just see her in all of Wild Rose again? Which is out now and you should go see it because it's much better. Easily the worst performance in the movie came from Sasha Lane, which surprised me because she made a great impression in The Miseducation of Cameron Post. She was completely unconvincing and her line delivery was always absolutely abysmal. She didn't fit her character whatsoever. But what sucks even more is that her character actually has potential to be interesting and well developed and well written. And the writing absolutely sucks, and her performance doesn't help. I'm not sure who's more to blame on this one. Both parties on this character were equally atrocious. Speaking of the awful writing, this film's writing is just so bad. The comedy may be some of the worst of the year. There is an especially painful scene where Daniel Day Kim refers to Hellboy as a monster, and Hellboy's like, "Who are you, call a monster? Have you looked in the mirror recently?" And as if that wasn't already unfunny as it is, he responds by saying, "Was that meant to be humor?" Which is also meant to be a joke, if you couldn't tell, because it's hard to tell because this film's jokes are just that unfunny. Seriously, the comedy in this film is easily the most painful aspect of the whole thing. There's a scene where a demon called Baba Yaga is trying to convince Hellboy to go into a deal with her, and she says, "They will build statues of you from the bones of your enemies." And I'm not even kidding, Hellboy says the line, "Gonna need a shit ton of bones." Ugh. The pacing is all over the place. There are some scenes that feel like they're going on forever, and then there are others that feel like they're over way too early. I mean, I didn't want them to go on or anything, cause this film is an absolute train wreck, but it felt like things were underdeveloped. There are characters in this film that get all their development in one scene and then nothing else, and then later on they'll get some random power and then that's it. But then for some reason there are multiple scenes devoted to the father-son relationship between Hellboy and his adoptive father. Not only were the scenes terrible, but they just did not fit the film at all. The music sounded as if Neil Marshall picked out a random Spotify playlist and just shoved it in the film. It was annoying, obnoxious, didn't fit whatsoever, and it was just so plain bad. The monster designs kinda sucked. They also all looked really fake, just like the rest of the CGI in the film. There is tons and tons of CGI blood in the film and it all looks fake. There's a scene where Hellboy is fighting giants and it is easily the worst action scene of the entire year. The CGI all looks terrible, it's very obviously green screened, and not only that, but the cinematography is plain hard to watch. There's a character who can turn into a cheetah and his CGI transformation is flat out abysmal. And for some ungodly reason, yet again, this is another big budget Hollywood movie that does not know how to make a CGI helicopter look remotely convincing. For a lot of the monsters, even if it didn't look good, at the very least you could tell they threw a lot of money at the CGI, but the helicopters looked like they didn't even try. And to my surprise, this is a problem that is becoming really big. I saw this in Skyscraper and I think I remember it in Mile 22 as well. It appears to be a trend in really awful piles of garbage, but at the same time these films all have sizable budgets and for some reason they can't even make something as simple as a helicopter look convincing. I thought we mastered this a long time ago, what the hell? The cinematography wasn't the best. There are a couple shots scattered throughout the film that are actually good and show Neil Marshall's talent, but then the rest of the film is either really blandly shot or really annoyingly shot like the giant scene. The color grading was really distracting. There's also a scene with color at the beginning that was kind of annoying. To try and make it look really cool, they make it black and white and the only color you can see is red. Not only is this an effect that you can achieve with free kids apps on many app stores on many phones, but it also just added nothing to the scene whatsoever. This isn't exactly the new Sin City. The film was edited pretty poorly as well. This is another one of those movies where they'll cut for no reason, like I talked about in my review of What Men Want. The action wasn't great either. The opening scene is meant to be this really cool fight scene and it's just kinda lame. The film felt like it had no weight to it. Nothing really felt like it had any consequence and it was all really predictable. And on top of that, the story is just so bizarre in its terribleness. I could rip apart this entire movie's plot if I really wanted to, but considering the film we're talking about, I can't really be bothered putting in all the effort for goddamn Hellboy, so I'm just gonna do a few specific parts that made no sense or were stupid. If you don't want this film spoiled for you because you want to watch it for some reason, then skip to the time code on the screen now. 3, 2, 1, go. So the film opens with some narration explaining the villain's backstory. Basically, she was betrayed by some of her coven, and then King Arthur stabbed her with Excalibur and cut her into many pieces, and yes, that is actually what happens. And so he explains that Merlin ordered knights to take each piece of her and bury them all far away from each other so that no one would ever find them, but they all just ride off on horses and bury them in England. And so when characters in this film search for them, they find them all really quickly. Why didn't Merlin just destroy the pieces? Why didn't King Arthur cut more pieces than 6? Why did you bury all the pieces in England when you were told to bury them all far away from each other? You're not even going to utilize the rest of the UK? Later on in the film, Hellboy is summoned to England to kill 3 giants like I was talking about earlier. But it turns out he wasn't actually summoned to kill giants, he was summoned so people could try and kill him. The people who summoned him are friends of his dad, and one of the people who's friends with the people who summoned him gives him a ton of exposition to show his past and stuff. And then they go out on their giant hunt and they find proof that the giants are there, and then they just try and kill Hellboy. Eventually they start electrocuting him in the water, and he does not die from being electrocuted in water, and he just kind of passes out after too long. Very conveniently, right as he's passing out, the giants show up and kill all of the humans. I can't for the life of me figure out why they didn't kill him after they killed the giants and then just try and make it look like the giants did it. Why did you even decide you had to electrocute him? They mentioned the idea of putting his head up on a wall despite the fact they are friends of his father. Anyways, eventually Hellboy wakes up and he kills the giants in an excruciating action sequence, and then he very conveniently passes out again. He gets very conveniently saved by his friend Alice, who takes him back to her apartment. And after they have a really poorly acted chat because Sacha Lane really can't act in this film, soldiers just smash through their window. It turns out they're just looking for Hellboy, but for some reason they decide to smash this woman's window. Hellboy's father knows Alice and he thinks this is a good idea. Isn't your task force meant to be kind of secret? What the hell are you doing? Oh, I almost forgot about the scene with the tongue. So basically, the evil lady in the film gets this evil pig guy who hates Hellboy to help her out. He finds out where her head is and he goes to get it, and it's in this cathedral, and he gets this one monk to help him get it. He sits there and stares at the monk who's kind of refusing to say the words of God to open the box for a bit before he decides, screw it, and then takes the tongue out of him and then puts it in his mouth and chews it a bit, and then does a really bad impression of the guy, and it opens the box somehow. I'm not religious, but isn't part of the thing about God that he's always watching? And sure, the film could use the excuse of, well, he's a changeling, so it makes sense. But if that's the case, then how does Alice have her tongue? Oh wait, I forgot, I wasn't meant to think about it, never mind. So I already mentioned that the antagonist of the film was only killed in the first place because her coven betrayed her. So obviously on her rise to power, they reintroduce them into the film and they beg for her mercy. And the one who really betrayed her does not get killed, while the other two do. She says something which is basically along the lines of, oh, I'm gonna keep you alive as long as you do something for me. But then Hellboy just shows up in the film, forgets she said it, and then the evil lady shoots Alice in the neck with something poisonous and then just leaves. This witch then gives Hellboy directions to Merlin so he can save Alice, and then just exits the film forever. I'm not even kidding, that's all she does. The thing that the evil lady wanted her to do is never established, and she never does anything again. Hellboy then goes to Merlin with Alice and the really unlikable other cheetah kind of guy. They heal Alice and Hellboy's like, hooray, and then Merlin knocks Alice and the cheetah guy out, and Hellboy's like, what are you doing? And then Merlin tells him that he was actually a descendant of King Arthur. He's actually the last living descendant of King Arthur, believe it or not. And at this point, the film is already well established that Hellboy is only on Earth because of Nazis. So does that make him King Arthur's Nazi great-grandson? I don't know what the film was trying to accomplish with this, but it just didn't work. And in fact, it only winds up making the film worse for the characters. Only a descendant of Arthur can pull the sword from the stone, and Hellboy does it, and the apocalypse starts because of it. They couldn't think of any plot conveniences to make the plot go on to the apocalypse starting, so they just made Hellboy a family member of King Arthur. What even is this movie? Overall, this film's kind of an embarrassment in every sense of the word. It does everything really poorly and is only barely competent because of a couple of nice shots. You'll have heard a lot of people saying it's not as bad as people have heard, but it's still pretty bad. But in my opinion, it might actually be worse than you've heard. This film is a complete and utter mess from the opening scene, and it doesn't actually do anything consistently well. On top of that, even though it does occasionally get so dumb that it's funny, the film just isn't a very enjoyable experience for the most part. I wouldn't consider it a so bad it's good film, and it's not a film I really ever want to see again. It's very poorly made, it's not interesting, it's a mess, it's just bad. It's not good. I don't have the energy to say any more about this god-awful pile of garbage. Quite honestly, I can't actually recommend this movie in good conscience. Sure, it's entertaining to pick apart at times, but for the most part it's just kind of unbearable. I've heard some people have managed to find so bad it's good, ironic entertainment out of this film, and if you're one of them, more power to you. And if you're one of the people who actually likes this movie, then more power to you. Enjoy what you want to enjoy, and can I ask you how you did it and what drugs you had? I'm giving Hellboy a 1 out of 10. Don't see this awful movie. That's the end of this video. Like, share, subscribe, I'm bad at outros, and I'll see you in whatever I do next.